And then you're going to have to get down to it. Now, what I see most of you now doing is you're asking questions. To me, they are, what's the best way of putting it? No, they're not. It's not addiction. It's a desire to avoid your terror of doing it. Do you follow? Mm-hmm. You're afraid of doing it, and you are afraid of doing it because you've been taught ever since day you were born, or even before then, you had expectations placed on you. Usually, most of you even had expectations placed on you before you were born. You know, some of you, they wanted to be your dad wanted to be a boy rather than a girl. Some of you, the opposite to that. Some of you, they expected that you'd be an intelligent person who does a whole lot of special things, and it hasn't turned out that way. And do you know what I mean? There's a whole lot of expectations that were placed upon you before you were even born. And then, there's obviously ones placed on you afterwards. So there's obviously a huge amount of, creation of this facade has been imposed upon by society and by parents. And we have a deep amount of terror about being our real self here. And that is a problem. So later we're going to see that there's a couple of ways we can address this. We can obviously spend all of our time up here, right, deconstructing all this without trying to address this. Or we can do both, can't we? Now, one's going to work and the other one's not. We can deconstruct all of this, but still refuse to feel that. And if we refuse to feel that, and I'm now pointing to the global fear of terror, the feeling of terror, if we refuse to feel terror and we refuse to go through that emotionally, then of course we're just going to be motivated to create another facade. And this is what many of you have done since meeting me. You're different people now, or you act differently now than you did before, but you basically substantially haven't changed. You've just created another facade thinking that this is the way of God's truth. And it's not. Does that make sense?
Yes.
The way of God's truth is to come face to face with everything that's going on and the underlying, fear that drives it. Eventually you're going to get to this and you're going to have to process it. And if you don't process it, the majority of you who don't process it will not hear divine truth anymore. Like at the moment, there's probably a couple of 100,000 people that have heard divine truth. There's 4,000 people around about who currently listen. Of those 4,000 people, very few have actually gone through accepting their facade. Very few. Count them on probably two hands. And I don't even know if it's one hand, to be frank. And as a result, every time you hear truth, there's no, don't tell me more, I've had enough now, I can't cope with more, that's it. You shut down, you run away, you reason with me about how you're doing well here and you're doing well there and you want me to agree. And it's all just avoidance of what's really going on, right? And wanting me to feed some addiction so that you don't have to feel how bad it is. The state of facade is bad. I know it's bad. If you don't know it's bad yet, you haven't accepted it yet. Once you accept it, you know it's bad. Like when I look at what mine was, I go, this is pretty bad. And pretty bad for me as well as others. Pretty bad. And I had to get to the stage where I accepted it with compassion, where I got to the point where I felt like I had compassion for the fact that I got created. It wasn't my doing. And particularly at the beginning, certainly was not my doing. And in my case, I created very little facades other than the ones my parents demanded of me. So I didn't have a different facade at work, and I didn't have a different facade at school, and I didn't have a different facade. I had basically one or two primary facades because I've always had a love for truth, you see. So I only had one or two primary facades that were created in my childhood when I didn't have a formulated mind to address the issue. And as a result, it was relatively easy for me to get rid of my facade in comparison to most. Right? But I've had more difficulties with pain than you're ever going to have. All the 14 are going to have far greater difficulties with pain because of the extent of it than any other person on the planet will have. But it still doesn't take away the fact that you need to address the terror that suppresses this pain. So what I'm suggesting to you, Kerry, is that unless you do both, unless you get through this facade, deconstruct it, and start touching this, your motivation for creating the facade will not change. Your motivation, you need to understand the motivation for the facade as well as understand the state of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And remember in the previous talk, we talked about the two primary motivations, the desensitisation to pain and the avoidance of the feeling of terror. They're the two primary motivations. And unless you address those motivations in the end, your facade will continue to get generated.
Yeah.
No matter what you do.
Thank you.
Yeah. It doesn't matter how many you have. It doesn't matter how bad they are or how devious they are or how straightforward they are. At the end of the day, unless you deal with that, you still won't get beyond it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Thanks.
If you go straight behind Lani.
Can you just speak about the difference between fear and the global terror? Like I can't really understand.
Yeah, I was very uncertain about using the word global for a start because we're talking about an internal emotion, not something to do in the world so much. And there's emotion inside of you that pervades everything you do. So basically, when we refer to global emotions, as we'll discuss later in our course, we're basically discussing that an emotion that affects everything. So you could say faith is a global emotion. It affects everything you do. Once you have some, it affects everything you do. It's a positive global emotion. And negative global emotion is terror. It affects everything you do. While it's in you, it's going to affect everything you do.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It really does, because before I was thinking of global as everyone on the planet.
Well, it's true, everyone on the planet does have it. But we're talking here about an emotion inside of yourself that affects every other thing that you do, say, think, feel.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
That's what we're primarily... Now, I couldn't come up with a single word that easily described that. Yeah. And so I left it to the course to describe it to you. And that's what we're talking about when we speak of global emotion. And there are positive global emotions and negative ones, as you'll find out in 2 days' time. And what we need to do is see that terror is a negative, in the sense that it affects us negatively, global emotion. It is the driving force for every choice we make, usually. Every choice.
So is terror underneath fear?
Well, no. Remember, false beliefs and false definitions of love create fear. So a lot of your fears are under the terror. You understand? A lot of your fears are actually underneath the terror. The terror is like a global cover over all of your fears.
So can you give an example of like what a global terror would be?
Well, I have already. I've said to you, it is the terror of you being yourself. Now that covers over many of your fears. So you're afraid to get up in front of people and speak, right? You're okay sitting in the chair, but getting up in front of people and speaking for an hour would stress you out, right? Yeah. You're afraid of that. Now that's an individual fear. But your global terror says, I'm afraid of being myself. So whenever I'm afraid of being myself, I will have lots and lots and lots of things that I do, all driven by that one terror of being afraid of being myself. Right? Lots of things, hundreds of things, thousands of things sometimes that I'll do to avoid just being me. So
that the real self, would that be like as a very, very, very small child when you had that sense of freedom and...
Yeah, most of us have had very few cognizant experiences of our real self. Because we were taught from a very young age that your real self was unacceptable to the environment in which you lived. You had to conform. That's the point of your facade. Conform to other people's viewpoint of what you should be. So your global terror is a lot about your real self, and we'll talk about that, in 4 days. Because we've got more material to give you yet. Yeah. Okay, let's go to Alan, thank you. And then David on this side.
AJ, if you're younger, presumably your facade is like, if you're 20 or something, it's a lot less than when you're older?
Well, I don't know. I've seen some people in their 20s with very intense facades. So I think a lot depends on what happened to you and the intensity of your childhood experience, the intensity of your parents' emotions, the intensity of the opposition to you being yourself. There's a lot of factors that are involved in it. Obviously, speaking in generalities, the younger you are, the less you've created facades as an adult. But I don't think you can just say if a person's younger, they have less facade, because I've seen some people who are very young have some pretty intense facades.
Okay, because that was the other part of my question, is that some people have much more terror and pain and fear than others.
Obviously,
Yeah.
because everyone's had a personal experience. But everyone has the primary terrors associated with being themselves, and in particular terrors about their relationship with God. Most people don't trust God at all, and so then they've become self-reliant. Most people have that. That is a general society-based terror. So some of them are going to be more intense than others. Like if you were brought up and beaten senseless as a child for a lot of your childhood, obviously you're going to have a lot of terror of violence, and you're going to be so afraid for your life. But for many of you, you are afraid of your life, and that didn't happen to you. So where did that come from? Well, obviously from generations handed down, the emotion not released by the parents, the sin of the parent getting transferred to the child through the gestation process before the child's even born. So many of you have terrors that you've got no idea even got there, how they got there. You don't have to know how they got there. You don't have to know what they are. All you need to do is feel the terror. Right, and this is what I see most of you trying to do. You're trying to go, what's this about? Why have I got this? Where did it come from? You're trying to understand it before you feel it. This is our problem. We're trying to understand everything before we feel it. Global terror, global problem. You see? It's a big problem, this desire to understand everything before you feel anything. You are only going to understand when you have felt. That's the only time you're going to understand. Right? So many of us want to do all the understanding before we feel. You're not going to. And it's impossible to, in fact. Because the very feeling that you have prevents the understanding. So unless you feel the feeling, you won't understand. So I've given up the desire to understand. I went through a lot of torture-based experiences that I had in the first century life. In this life, I remembered them and had to go through them again. And when I went through them, I had no concept what caused them. I didn't know who I was at the time. I didn't know what they were. I just remembered people nailing stuff into me and other events as well. With dogs and getting eaten by a dog and being speared through the hip with a burning spear and a lot of other events I went through, feeling them without understanding anything about them. And interestingly enough, there was no evidence on my body. So with you, there'll be some if there were actual events. But with me, no evidence on my body that any of those events actually occurred. And yet I still had enough trust in God and the process to actually feel the emotions associated with those events without even knowing what they're about. And for many of those events, I didn't know till 7 years after I processed the emotion what those events were about.
So hanging up on what you think they are is a real block.
Yes. In fact, you've got to give up what you think they are. Most of you are going to be wrong. And in fact, the facade wants you to be wrong so that you don't process it. See, that's why you've got to give it up, because the facade wants you to be wrong about it. The facade wants you to go, you might be wrong, so you can't feel it until you know what it's about. That's what the facade wants you to do. It's the thing that's going, you're going to go crazy if you feel things you don't know what they're about. The facade does all that for you. None of it's true. You're going to go crazy if you don't do it. And there's plenty of evidence of that. How many people in their aged life get dementia? Right? There's a growing proportion. It's like becoming an epidemic now, right? Particularly in Western society. It's becoming an epidemic. Why? is it, becoming an epidemic? Because the majority of us don't want to remember. We don't want to go through the feelings. And as a result, we're shutting down more and more and more and more feelings to such a point that we can't even be cognizant anymore about who we even are. That's how you go crazy. The way you don't go crazy is by giving up having to know what the feeling's about and just processing the feeling, letting yourself feel the feeling.
And that's what happened with Mary when you used to tell her what the emotion was. It didn't help one little bit that you told Mary what the emotion was. So
not at all, did it, darling?
Yeah.
Did it help you at all being told what an emotion was before you knew it yourself?
Not in the beginning. It does now, though, sometimes.
Well, it does now because Mary's accepted her facade, so she can now not block what's going on and therefore can feel the emotion. But right at the beginning, it didn't help at all. In fact, you felt more...
Well, it built more facade, really.
Yeah.
Because I then tried to not be like that without acknowledging that I was like that. Yeah. And then it got very complex and tiring.
And often angry and bitter.
Very angry. And then just get further and further away from where you need to be going, which is towards the fear and the truth.
Yeah, and Mary and I have had long conversations about what's going on for Mary. And in the end, I've just said it to Mary, look, I don't want to talk to you anymore about what you want to ask. because what Mary was doing was asking me so that she could avoid feeling it. Right? And I'm saying, no, you just got to choose to feel it. And the best thing you can do is to work out why you don't want to feel it, instead of asking everything about it. Do you see what I'm saying? Wanting to know things in advance here is avoiding the process of actually feeling what is already there that you can actually feel. Yeah.
I found that it was actually my fear driving the process, the desire to know, and then I stopped, and then I felt afraid.
Yeah. So Mary's finding she's going through this much easier now because she's not asking all the time in order to prevent the terror. Does that make sense? It makes sense, doesn't it? So all we've got to do is give up some things. It's a lot, ironically, it's a lot simpler. And while I've described all of these things, the reason why I'm describing it to you is so you can have compassion. See, we still haven't had many questions about compassion. You notice that? And the reason why is because we don't have compassion. Yeah. All right. Who are we? I'm David. So.
When feeling through our attitudes to our facade.
Yep.
If got more of a childhood facade that we judge, say, of it being really weak, that facade was really weak.
Yep.
Do we then go into feeling about how weak we actually felt during that period of our life, kind of thing? Is that how we challenge that facade and the judgment of it?
Yeah, you've got to surrender to each emotion, David. So if there is an emotion inside of you feeling weak, then just surrender to it and just feel weak, The key to each emotional process is to just allow yourself to surrender to it. It's quite a simple thing. Of course, the fear prevents surrender. It's like a global cover over surrender, real surrender. Yeah. So obviously, when you do surrender, you initially it's going to be hard because you always will hit the fear. Until you get through the fear, you'll always just hit the fear before you actually finish up surrendering to the actual emotion. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Yeah. And the fear is going through fear. We'll talk about that later too. But going through fear is actually, it's going to look pretty bad. The world around you is going to judge it. It's going to look pretty bad to you. Even you'll be scared of it. You'll freak out about the process. You'll be quite worried about and concerned about your own sanity. You'll be concerned about your psychological state. You'll be, there's all sorts of things in that place that you'll go through just working your way through it, right? And it has to be done before you're really going to feel any pain-based emotion in the end. So you can't circumnavigate it, the fear. You'll find you once you start letting yourself go through it, there'll be times when you start feeling another emotion and then all of a sudden you come up against the fear again. Start feeling another emotion and then come up against the fear again. And then after a while of doing that, in some cases for you, some of you, it's going to take years of doing that before you go, I've just got to feel this fear and develop a will to feel the fear.
So my fear of the emotion is more the block around my facade than actually the feeling of weakness.
Yes, you can see the facade is just what you do to avoid your fear of emotion. So this is the real block. This is just the monster you've created to avoid the block.
Yep.
You see?
Yep.
So you do need to deconstruct the monster, but because the monster helps you avoid the block. The addictions help you avoid the block and so forth. So you do need to deconstruct it, but at the end of the day, the point of the deconstruction is not for itself, but rather to get to this and to feel it as a feeling. That's the point of it. Get to that point. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep. Pleasure. Okay. Okay. If we go to Patty over here, thanks.
So accepting facade feels radically new to me. And even saying the word compassion brings tears to my eyes.
Yeah. Yeah.
So is that because this is a reflection of God's definition of love and it's contrasting to the world's definition of love?
Yes.
So it's not actually feeling God's love, but it's just feeling some flavor of it, or
well, what will happen when you start having compassion for your facade is you'll get a lot more assistance from your celestial friends. You'll get a lot more love from them as well, because you're able. They're wanting to help you go through this process of getting through they want you to have the awakening to sin that you need to have, right? And they know through their personal experience what they've needed to do that. And a lot of it's about this, like accepting the facade and getting to the point where emotionally I go, yeah, this is how I am right now. And they know that. And so whenever you even have compassion for yourself, feeling that, they're going to be in agreement with it. God's going to be in agreement with it. So you will receive some love in that point if you long for it, certainly, because you're in agreement with what needs to be done from God's perspective and from their perspective. So you will receive their love and God's. And quite often that you'll be overwhelmed by that even. But many of you don't even allow yourself to be overwhelmed. And why? Because you are terrified of being overwhelmed. So even that will get to the point where you get afraid of that emotion. You see what I'm saying? This is what I'm saying. With this emotion, you're going to hit it so many times. If you're real sincere about this process, you're going to hit this emotion so many times before you actually have a sincere desire to actually feel that emotion. You're going to hit it a lot. You start feeling an emotion, start crying, and then you get freaked out and you shut it all down.
And kicks the
there
resistance
it is, kicking in again.
Into high gear, yeah.
And you're going to get to that stage over and over and over again before you realise that actually this is what Jesus has been talking to you about, this global experience of terror that I'm going to have to go through at some point. And at this stage, I don't have my will developed to go through it, so I need to develop my will to go through it. Once you've developed your will to go through it, you will go through it. It'll be a natural process. Does that make sense? But it's only once you have. Till then, you're going to be fighting it all the time. Every time you hit to it, you go, I want to run away again. I want to run again. And this will be a growing state within you. If you're sincere, it may take you even just a few years from touching it the first time to actually dealing with it. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. It took me 3 years, like I said, between those two places. Touching it and then actually dealing with it, where I went through the experience emotionally of dealing with it. Yep. So don't be surprised if it takes you a similar amount of time. Yeah. It's wonderful, the growing awareness. If we come across, thanks to Susan, thanks.
I'm not sure that I've put this together yet, but I have this feeling, and maybe it's obvious, that it's the terror from getting into trouble in my childhood that caused me to be hypersensitive to the positives and negatives of even the words involved in this, like corrupt and sin. Mm-hmm. And I find when I first read them that I'm
freak out.
Yeah, I freak out.
Yeah.
And I read them and I read them.
That's why I use the words.
Yeah. Because it gets you in touch with.
Well, I use the words for two reasons. They are the truth, number one. And when I use them, it also touches a point inside of you of feeling like, that, you know, even that word feels confronting to me to consider, right? Remember, like I said to the previous group, remember the very first time I used the word God with you? Most of you were freaked out, eh? You thought you were coming to some religious thingamabob and, you know, as your definition of religion, and many of you came from New Age circles, which already had a lot of anger towards religion, right? I mean, some fella you come along to see, you know, I don't know what you expected at that time, considering the fact that I was saying I was Jesus. But anyway, you know, that I must know God if that's the case. But most of you were freaking out about that. And so even the word God was like, do not say that word to me, right? It's exactly the same with many of the other words I wanted to use with you, like sin. For most of you, when I say that word, it's like, do not use that word for me. Sin connotates judgment for the majority of you, right? So, you know, you feel you're being judged as soon as we mention sin. So it's the same with a lot of the words I'm using now in these presentations. They are there to help confront the emotions that exist and expose within you the fact that these emotions do exist.
It almost feels like we were conditioned to have judgment about the words, and the very judgment about the words created the facade.
Yeah, it's more that the judgment about the words is about more of the other judgments that have occurred, and you know, it's more the other way around. The emotion of pain causes judgment in the end, preventing the emotion of pain.
Okay, it's like at a feeling level.
Yeah.
More than
yeah. And the intellect, remember, the intellect is just responding to the demands of the soul. So if the intellect's just going, do what you think is the logical thing so that I can avoid these things.
Yeah.
And the intellect's going to do what it needs to do, just in response. Natural. Yeah. And we have to deconstruct that process, but for most of us we don't. So we're going around using our intellect, thinking we're being logical, like I said, when actually we're being so illogical. You know, if I say the words blasphemy, now for most of you that's a pretty strong word, right? And most of it has religious connotations. But the reality is you blaspheme God most of the day, right? But see, you've got so much judgment about that word that when you hear that word, it's like, oh, here we go, I'm getting condemned again. I'm getting judged again. No, we're just saying a truth. The word blaspheme means something in the English language, and we're using it to demonstrate what it means. So same with other words, corrupt. The word corrupt means something in the English language, and we need to state it. Does that make sense? For what it is. Use it when we need to use it. It has no emotional connotation except for the emotions you give it.
Inside me, yeah.
Which come from your avoidance of pain and your false beliefs and your false definitions of love that are now in you emotionally.
For myself, it's just the terror of getting into
trouble. If you hold the
trouble.
mic close.
Oh, yeah, it's just the terror of getting into trouble. Yeah.
Yeah, well, the terror of getting into trouble is really, though, a terror about being yourself, isn't it? So there's terrors under that.
Right.
So I'd call it a fear of getting into trouble, but there's bigger terrors that are underneath that.
Thank you.
So that's great and encouraging, isn't it? All right, now I'm way over time by 20 minutes, guys, so we're going to have to leave our Q&A there, otherwise we won't get through the day on time. So, and we're already over time, so if we leave our Q&A there and we have it's a 30-minute break, so that means everyone comes back at 2 o'clock and we can discuss, we can do the feedback sessions then.